I think that we can go ahead and start. Are we on? Okay. Today we're going to start off with fair housing. What chapter is that? 19? Okay. Now listen, when we're discussing fair housing today, it's an interesting chapter from the standpoint of when we were talking about agency. You know, I'm not too worried about an agency violation, and the reason I'm not worried about an agency violation is simply because the commission has a relatively small staff. I mean, think about how badly you have to screw up for someone to investigate you. The fact of the matter is, under the agency chapter, someone had to be so mad at you that they filed a complaint. The commission could, on its own authority, come in one day and audit your files, but they don't. They have bigger fish to fry. For example, most of the time that the Real Estate Commission audits people is because of a trust violation. Well, you guys are PBs. You're not going to have a trust violation. You worry about that when you have your own office. So as much as I beat agency into you, I don't worry that much. You try to do the right thing, you have your paperwork in order, usually you will be able to weather a complaint on agency. Fair housing is a little bit different from this standpoint. Fair housing is a little bit different. Do you understand that there are organizations out there that their entire goal in existence is to make sure that the fair housing laws are followed? If you stay in this business long enough, and I promise you, if you go into property management, you will absolutely be shocked at some point in your career over fair housing. There are local organizations, there are state organizations, there are federal organizations, there are nonprofit organizations. This is what they do, make sure that these laws are followed. Having said that, I've never actually worried about being shot. I may have been shot, I'll never know, because if I was, I obviously passed because I didn't, there was no repercussions for it. But I am very conservative when it comes to fair housing. I have my answers ready. When someone asks me a question I believe is a violation of fair housing, I say so. I don't say you're a bad person. I'm saying what you're asking me is in violation of fair housing. Do you have any questions about the property, about the amenities of the property? And by the way, if somebody asks me a question and it's obviously they're a bigot, I say, dude, we can't work together. Okay, I'm not going to be involved in this transaction if that's the way you're going to play. Okay? But occasionally, I know this sounds weird. But there are actually some, what I consider to be benign fair housing violations. And you say, well, wait a minute. If this law is this serious, how can there be benign fair housing violations? There are questions out there. You'll see that one of the protected classes has to do with familial status. Okay? Children under the age of 18. I'm not even going to ask you for a show of hands, but I suspect many of you that are parents, when you were looking for a place to live, asked about children in an area or about families in an area. And I don't blame you for asking. As an agent, I choose not to answer those questions, okay? But since it's a protected class, when you're asking about kids in the area, I'm sorry, what you're asking me I feel like would be a violation of fair housing for me to answer. Do you have any other questions about the amenities, the house, blah, blah, blah? That's how conservative I am, and I choose to stay true to that. And the reason I do is, by doing that, I don't slip up. I actually had a woman call me one day on a house I had listed over in Leesville School District. At the time, Leesville School District was the hottest school district. The school had been recently built, and I had a listing over there. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I know someone's buying that with kids that are going to go to this school. All right? I didn't use that in my marketing, but I know what it is. So this woman calls me up, and she asked all the appropriate questions. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2,800 square feet, blah, 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 blah. We're just going on and on about this, all of which is fine. Then she asked me this question. She said, well, I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old. Will they have kids in the neighborhood to play with? Okay, I'm not shocked by this question. I already have my answer prepared. Ma'am, I appreciate your question. Having said that, I believe it's a violation of fair housing for me to answer. Not for you to ask, but for me to answer that type of question. Do you have any other questions about the amenities, the clubhouse, the pool, anything like that? I'll be glad to answer those questions. And here's exactly what she said. She said, oh, now that you've said what a real estate agent has to say, will you tell me if there are any kids in this neighborhood? And of course I said, well, since you phrased it like that, well, yeah, no, that's not what I said. What I said was, well, ma'am, I'm not going to answer that question, but I'll be glad to answer any questions about the house. Okay, and to which she follows it up with this. Well, I know a lot of real estate agents would answer that question. silly. You probably need to get one of those real estate agents because you will never get me to answer that question. I don't feel like it's appropriate. I may be too conservative on that, but you're not going to push me over that slippery slope to answering questions I believe to be in fair housing. I have lost sleep before worrying about agency violations because you're in this business long enough, you're going to do something wrong. I have never lost a minute's sleep worrying about a fair housing violation because I have my stock answers ready to go. I would encourage you to also do that. And talk to people that are smarter than me. There are people that this is what they do in life. The North Carolina, what's it called, Human Relations Commission. If you have questions about it, devise your questions, call them up. This is what they do for a living, is answer questions on this. And that way, if you devise your answers around their guidance, you're probably going to be okay. A little bit later today, I'm going to show you HUD guidance on advertising, for example. That's going to be a big deal for the test, by the way. It's where advertising and fair housing mix, okay? But let me give you an example. You don't have to always agree with what HUD's guidance is. But if they give you guidance, I would follow it. I grew up in Kinston. It's just a small eastern North Carolina town. Let me tell you how we give directions in Kinston. We say, why don't you go down to the corner, turn right at Baptist Church, or at, what's the name of the church? Greenwood Baptist Church. And then you're going to go down, you're going to take a left at the Catholic Church. And then, there's a church on every corner in Kinston. And so that's the way we would give directions. But you know what a protected class is? Religion. And so am I showing favoritism to a religion by using these as landmarks? HUD says don't do it. Say go to 3rd Street and turn right, go to Smith and turn left. Do not use these markers as landmarks. Sometimes when I look at that, I say that seems a little bit overboard. But having said that, that's HUD guidance, and so I'm not going to break it. Okay? So watch for things like this as you study. Figure out how to make your answers appropriate, make your guidance appropriate, and then do it every time. That way it's defensible if it ever comes up.
Can you suggest that they look they can do their own research or drive the neighborhood or?
Well, let me ask you something. They're getting ready to buy a $750,000 house. Are you suggesting they are not going to do any research on this? No. It's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. I actually, in talking to the Human Relations Commission, I talked to them one day about an ad that had the words, great family neighborhood. I would not use that personally because I think that's getting a little too close to the edge. But you know what they said? The guy there said, we have no problem with this. Okay, fine. I just need to know how to guide my agents on this. Let me get your name. I'll write it down that I got this guidance on this date. And by the way, if someone says great family neighborhood, do I really think that this is a bad person? Just because I choose not to do it doesn't make them a bad person for us saying so. I think a lot of agents do that. And I think it's okay. Drive around, do your own research on things like this. You could actually even provide unbiased third-party resources. So for example, on your website, if you had the information about the schools, or if you had information about the census data, that's okay. Unbiased third-party data is safe, but they will do their own research given the availability of the information. Okay? All right. That's kind of your starting point on this. Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
Well, one thing that you had mentioned in our last class that helped me understand this and may help other people is you don't know if that person's a creeper or not. So you don't want to be advising them to drive by the bus stop or where that's at or what kind of kids are next door. And that's the world we live in these days. So you have no idea who you're dealing with on the phone. They may sound like the nicest person. So you just kind of have to have that neutral ground. You don't want to say, oh yeah, the bus comes at 3:30 at this stop, do a drive-by.
Yeah, I do use that example a lot. And then at the end of the day, what I normally end it with is, anytime you're talking about houses or amenities, you're probably safe. The minute you start talking about personalities, all of a sudden you have put yourself in kind of a danger zone. And that's the way I choose to use for my guidance. Okay. All right, that was your starting point. Now let me talk to you about where we're going in this class. This chapter right here can be so succinct if you let it. And here's why. We're basically talking about 3 laws. Now, when we talk about these 3 laws, I'll kind of throw a 4th one in at the end, but it's mostly these 3 laws. The first one is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. These are all going to come up in just a moment. You can write them down now, or you can listen if you want to. But the Civil Rights Act of 1866, that is the correct date. Can you tell me what was going on in the United States in 1866? It was the end of the what?
Civil War.
Civil War. Does it make sense that this would have been the first of the major civil rights legislation in 1866, right? And what you're going to find out, that in 1866, first of all, they knew how to write laws, okay? In other words, this really only had one topic, and there were no exemptions. Isn't that weird for this class to say something and there are no exemptions? So this had to do with protections for race only, and there are no exemptions. What I mean by no exemptions, this applied to all walks of life, not just buying real estate. It applies to real estate because it obviously, if it applies to all walks of life and to prohibit discrimination, it covers real estate as well. Makes sense? So Civil Rights Act of 1866, we can kind of set it aside. We'll come back to it in just a moment, but when I do, I think I just actually gave you the notes you need to know. Then we're going to talk about two fair housing acts. And Sandy, is it important that these are fair what? Housing acts. A fair housing act. Now the question that she was asking me about is, someone goes into downtown Raleigh and they say, hey listen, I'd like to rent a place for my sporting goods store. I'd like to rent a place for my sporting goods store. They take one look at me and they say, Chris, we don't think that you're going to match the racial makeup of this area. We don't think you're going to succeed. And as your landlord, I am probably not going to rent this to you because I want to get paid. All right? Does it sound offensive that they prohibit me from buying this property? Yes. But is it a violation of the Fair Housing Act? No. Why did he not rent to me, by the way? Because of my what? Because of my race. Because of my race. Even though it's not a violation of the Fair Housing Act, I could go after him under what? The Civil Rights Act of 1866 because it was about my race, right? So watch that on the exam. The question is not always, is this offensive? Because a lot of times the answer, yeah, it's clearly offensive. It's about, is it a violation of fair housing? Not if it has to do with commercial, it's not. Okay? We're going to have a federal act and we're going to have a state fair housing act. The federal act, it's federal, and it has to do with housing. Do you have any idea what department is probably going to oversee the Fair Housing Act, the Federal Fair Housing Act, excuse me? Why HUD? Because it's federal and it involves housing. And that's what HUD does. Needless to say, the State Fair Housing Act, we have an agency that oversees it in North Carolina. And I mentioned it to you already, the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. Okay? Here's some good news. Here's some good news. Well, I'll start off with some bad news. You're going to have to memorize some things, okay? But the good news about it is that the prohibitions under the State Act and the Federal Act are exactly the same. They're exactly the same prohibitions. Once you learn it once, you already know it for the other act. Same 7 protected classes. Once you know it once, you know it for the other act. The exemptions are going to be slightly different. The exemptions are going to be slightly different. That's what caught Constance a little bit earlier as she was looking at these. So now you kind of know succinctly what it is you're studying about these acts. Okay? Now let me talk to you real quickly about this slide because there's something important about this slide. If you understand that first bullet point, it's very, very important. The purpose of civil rights laws is to create a marketplace where all persons have the opportunity to live where they choose, obviously within their financial means. Okay? So, they have a marketplace where they have opportunity. The idea behind the Fair Housing Acts is so as not to limit the available units for a person in a protected class versus someone who is not. That's the idea. And so later when you look at these exemptions, you'll find out the exemptions are so narrow, they really don't hurt the marketplace that much. Okay? That's an important point. And then clearly, violation of these is also ground for a disciplinary action by the commission. If you're a bad person and you go out and you're offensive to these acts, just know that the Real Estate Commission is going to pile on as well. As I'm looking around this room, I'm assuming that none of you are going to intentionally violate fair housing acts. Civil Rights Act of 1866, based on race, no exemptions. I am done with that slide right there. Okay? And remember the date, remember what was going on, and I think you're probably going to be okay. How do you like that? If everything went that easy in this class. So let's move on to the Federal Fair Housing Act. Now notice this gets a red star. Okay. Not on this slide, but I do want you to write this down in your margins. I want you to write down the prohibitions under the Federal Fair Housing Act. What is prohibited by the Federal Fair Housing Act? Are you ready? What is prohibited under the Federal Fair Housing Act? Now you're ready. Okay, here it comes. It prohibits discrimination in the sale or rental of what? Housing. Prohibits discrimination in the sale or rental of housing. The reason I emphasize rental is sometimes I just forget to bring it up because I assume that I wanted to make sure that you had it in your notes. Prohibits discrimination in the sale or rental of housing, but I'm not through yet. It prohibits discrimination in the advertising of the sale or rental of housing. Prohibits discrimination in the advertising of housing. It prohibits discrimination in brokerage services. Prohibits discrimination in brokerage services. And what I mean by that is, notice that you didn't have to answer any questions about your race, religion, ethnicity as you were signing up for this class, right? Because if you had, we would have got busted. Actually, we're good people. We wouldn't have asked you anyway. But having said that, we could not have used that as a baseline of who we choose to teach. The MLS cannot use it as a baseline of who they choose to give permission to join the MLS. The Real Estate Commission is not going to do it. The Association of Realtors, all of us involved in brokerage services will absolutely not discriminate. Okay? And then it also just prohibits discrimination in the financing of the sale of houses as well. All right, I have more good news for you. The more good news is, I doubt seriously if you have to memorize this list. Okay? But having said that, do you understand that all these are things that surround a transaction having to do with housing? It prohibits discrimination in all those. All right? And do you remember the other good news? The prohibitions are the same for the federal law as they are for the state law. So when I get to the state law, I'm just going to say ditto. Okay? That's good news. All right, now, let's talk about the protected classes under the Fair Housing Acts. The protected classes under the Fair Housing Acts. All right, I'm going to tell on myself for a moment.
Classes.
The protected classes, yeah, see up there, the protected classes. I'm going to tell on myself just a little bit here. And don't tell my wife or my child this, but sometimes I'm wrong. Okay, sometimes I'm wrong, all right? And I made a statement, I've always made a statement in this class that I don't believe that the commission gets too bent out of shape about what order that these prohibitions came, or these protected classes came into being. I look at it as there being 7 classes currently in the year 2000, whatever year we're in, 2018? Okay? But they came about in this way: 4 in 1968, 1 in 1974, and 1988. I have never taught them this way, but I've had someone say, Chris, you might want to start teaching them how they came into existence. So I want you to know that they're not only 7, but it's important for you to understand those first 4 came about in 1968. So I'm going to give you the way I've always remembered the 7 protected classes. And when I say I've always remembered, I took this class in the 90s. All right? I learned it in the 90s. I've never had to relearn it because we used a mnemonic at that time, and that has worked all these years. If you want to know what the 7 protected classes are, it is fresh corn. I want you to notice. How I have fresh corn written there. Can you see it? Okay. And by the way, one last note on this before we get started. In this class, some words have very, very specific meanings. All right? So make sure you know those words when I tell you. For example, the first word, the first protected class, has to do with familial status. You will not discriminate based on familial status. Now, here's what's important about familial status. The definition. The definition of familial status has absolutely nothing to do with the coupling of adults. It has everything to do with children under the age of 18 in the home. Children under the age of 18 in the home, including natural-born children, adopted children, children that are under guardianship, pregnant women are actually even covered under this as well. Familial status. Now let me ask you this question. If a homosexual couple was seeking guidance, or was seeking housing, and they were turned away because they were homosexual, does that sound offensive? It does to me. Is it a violation of this law? No, it's not. It's not, okay? So again, remember, the question is not, is it offensive? The question is it a violation of this law? By the way, just so you'll know, as realtors, we actually, in our code of ethics, you would not be able to discriminate against same-sex couples, okay? So even though it's not covered by fair housing laws, the Realtor Association does, in fact, cover same-sex users, okay? Same-sex couples. The RE for religion, okay? The S for sex, male, female. Notice when sex came about, and again, are you seeing that thing? You'll see it again when we start talking about Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that sex is protected here, marital status is protected under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And notice that it goes back to the 70s, the Equal Rights Movement of the 70s, right? So that makes sense that it would have come about at that point. The other word I want you to have a star beside is handicap, more commonly referred to as disability. Okay? The reason I want you to have a star beside disability is because of the definition of disability. This will come up in just a moment, but I want you to listen closely to my definition of a disability. Any physical or mental impairment. Any physical or mental impairment that affects one or more life functions. Any physical or mental impairment that affects one or more life functions. You know, again, growing up in Kinston and coming up here, I'm a fairly naive guy coming into a big market. And if you asked me what a disability was, I would have said, oh, you're talking about someone in a wheelchair, right? Because, I mean, that's kind of my familiarity. Well, obviously, not just wheelchair, someone that's blind as well. Seeing eye dog, I can recognize stuff like that. But then you start adding mental disabilities at this point. What could we be talking about today? You know, certainly we could be talking about someone that had extreme mental disabilities, but then we also could be talking today about things like PTSD and stuff like that. Have you heard the concept of the comfort dogs, the service animals and things like this? So things that I never really thought of coming off of the farm. There are protections today about these, and some of them are not visible. That's what makes it more difficult from a real estate agent's standpoint. Even if it's not visible, there may be people may be dealing with something that we can't see, that they need some relief. Maybe it's a animal, maybe it's a service dog or something along that lines. We will talk in detail about that in just a little bit. I need you to know right now the definition of disability, because it's the same in fair housing as it is later when we talk about the American with Disabilities Act for commercial properties, okay? Handicap status, disability. CO for color, R for race, N for national origin. If you'll just use your Webster's definitions, you will be okay on those. Color, race, national origin. Those are your 7 protected classes. What did I say the good news was about these 7 protected classes? Once you know them, they're also the same for the state act. Okay, so what have you learned that's important so far? the prohibitions under this act and the 7 protected classes. Questions or comments so far? As an agent, you're going to do your business without regard to whether someone's in a protected class. Do you remember the language that we saw in the listing agreement, the buyer agency agreement? Do you remember why that information is in our agency agreements? What's that? It is a rule. It is a rule. The Real Estate Commission says so. All of our agency agreements must address these topics, okay?
Do you need to remember the years?
You know, normally, Victor, I would say no. Yeah, but I would say for the national exam, you may want to at least take a look at that. Listen, I gotta be honest with you. I don't think it's important. I don't think the commission cares how it was practiced in '68. You know what they really ought to care about? How it's practiced in 2018. And that's how I would mainly study. But I did have someone tell me, you might want to tell people to at least be cognizant of the fact they came at different times. And actually, it kind of makes a little bit of sense because sex came about in '74 with the Equal Rights Movement, and then '88, more contemporarily, disability and familial status have been the issue. So you might could work backwards.
What do you mean by that? That's
Which one, sorry?
the sex one? So what is it about?
Well, because it came about in '74, it is kind of generational that it came about because that was a very big movement in the '70s. And so it kind of makes sense that it came after some of these others. And then, like I say, more contemporary disability and familial status are
Is that female or male?
male, female. That's correct. Yep. Yep. Okay. And just so you know, they use the same. You've got this in your notes, of course. Notice in red. It's all about the children, not the adults. Handicap and condition. I gave you that definition right there just a moment ago. Let's go ahead and spend some time on this as long as we're here. Because I have some other things to say, and you have a slide. So it makes sense that we just go ahead and accomplish this while we're here. I'm going to have to go a little bit long on this first break, because when I get started, it's going to take me about 10 minutes to knock this out. When we talk about handicapping status or disability, you already have the definition. Are you comfortable that that's the same definition that I gave you? The other 2 words that you need to be familiar with are the concept of a reasonable accommodation versus a reasonable modification. Reasonable accommodation versus a reasonable modification. And listen, if it comes down to it, this is actually somewhat simple. A reasonable accommodation is relaxing a rule to allow the disabled person to more fully enjoy the property. The key word here I'm looking at is accommodation. A reasonable accommodation means, hey, landlord, you changed a rule to allow a disabled person to more fully enjoy the amenities of your property. What do you think a reasonable modification is? Not just changing a rule or relaxing a rule. You're actually, when you modify something, you're literally changing a structure. You're changing a structure. A modification is a change of structure. Let me give you an example of both. I'm going to tell you a long story. I'm going to tell it to you really quickly because the part of the story that's important is only the end. Okay? I was telling you that I'm fairly naive when I get into the real estate business. I'm young. I'm just off the farm. And I ended up in the mobile home park business. We bought mobile homes. I managed the mobile homes. I'm in my late 30s, or my late 20s, early 30s when I'm doing this. And basically, I'm the one who handles people coming into and out of the property, leases and renewals, and also when they're terminating. Okay, that was my end of the business. So I meet this, well, let me go back one more step on that. Back in the 90s, there was a major lawsuit involving dogs. And it started out in San Francisco, but it had repercussions all across the country. A woman was mauled in the hallway of an apartment complex by a large Mastiff-type dog. Okay? The owners of the property and the manager of the property ended up being sued for over $6 million because of this. Okay, so sad enough we got someone who's been mauled, lost of life. but now the landlords are also sued as well. Think about what this did to everybody across the country. We're looking at our rules regarding dogs. You know who else is looking at rules regarding dogs? Our insurance company. Our insurance company. Guys, y'all have to do something about dogs. Well, do you know what percentage of people in a mobile home park have a dog? 100%. 100%. I mean, think about it. They're buying it because they have a little courtyard, you know, within the community that they can have their pets and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons that they were there, as opposed to an apartment complex where a lot of them were limited. And you think about why did the landlord get sued? It had to do with the one that got mauled in the hallway, which is a common area, right? So now all of a sudden, lawsuit, insurance company, and now we're dealing with this issue. So here's what happens. We get together, all the investors, all the owners, and we're talking about this. We need a dog policy. Okay, what's your policy? No aggressive breed dogs. Okay, so you start listening to the list of aggressive breed dogs. You know what it would include? At the time, it was Dobermans. Okay, Rottweilers were just coming onto the scene. Pits weren't as big a deal, but they were on the list, of course. Did somebody say German Shepherd? Yeah, German Shepherds were actually on the list as well. So as we're naming these, some of the people are talking, they're like, hey, listen, I have one of these dogs, and he wouldn't hurt a flea. Okay, we can't come to an agreement on that, all right? So we said, well, how about this? No dogs over 45 pounds. You ever seen stuff like that in apartments? No dogs over 45 pounds. All right, so now we start talking about that. And then somebody said, well, that means my dog can't stay, but his pit bull, which is the meanest little SOB I've ever seen in my life, he can stay. And, you know, so now we can't come to agreement on that. So finally, I dropped the hammer. And I said, well, here's this. No dogs. How about no freaking dogs? That's our policy from now on. And obviously, we didn't make the people that were living there get rid of their dogs immediately. But obviously, we had to say, you know, you're not going to be able to have dogs running around in your little courtyard. If you lose a dog for some reason, don't get another one of that variety. You know, we're trying to make it as we're not just going to go in and take a dog away from them in the middle of the night. Okay. So anyway, we now have a policy. You're coming in to our property, no dogs. It's on the lease. It's in bold print with an exclamation point after. Okay. So now let me flash forward. I have a tenant who, potential tenant that comes in. I put her through the battery of tests that I put everybody through. Income, is it okay for me to check her income? Yeah, I mean, I think I need to treat people the same, but our policy was that you need to make at least 3 times, you need to make 3 times your monthly rent. As long as you make at least 3 times your monthly rent, you're fine on income. I check her credit, is that okay? Can you check her credit? Yeah, that's okay, as long as I'm the same for everybody. Check the credit. I checked her criminal background on this. She passed with flying colors. This is someone that I'm going to rent to, all right? So we're standing there at my desk, and I slide the lease agreement. Now keep in mind, by the time all this has been done, we have seen each other 3 times. We've known each other for about 4 or 5 days while we're waiting for these tests and stuff to get back. So I think we know each other, okay? I slide across the desk, the lease agreement. And she looks at it and she says, oh, Chris, it says right here, no dogs. I have a dog. I'm like, oh gosh. Well, here we go. This is my first test of my no dog policy. I'm like, man, I'm sorry, we're not going to allow any dogs in this park. We're not going to allow pets. And she said, oh, he's not a pet. I said, okay. She said, he's a comfort animal. Well, this is interesting. First of all, I don't know the fair housing laws then the way I know them now.